Hey everyone, it's another super exciting day because we have a new product release. And this is a product that we've been working on behind the scenes for quite some time. It's pretty special for a number of reasons that we'll get into. First things first, this product is in our series of Studio Cabs plugins. So these are guitar, cabinet, impulse, response plugins. And this one is called Contenders. Unlike our previous products, which have been more of a kind of narrow focus on a single brand, this one features multiple cabs from basically the biggest brands in guitar cabinets. Now, one of the points that makes this different is that I am not the person that captured the impulses for this. Instead, the impulses were captured by a good friend of mine who is probably one of the most obsessive tone hunting people I've ever come across. His name is Francesco Filigoi. You might have come across him on social media. He's also a brilliant guitarist. And I can't really think of anyone that I would be as comfortable outsourcing the creation of guitar cabs to. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Francesco, who's here on the line with me, into the conversation. So first of all, maybe tell us a little bit about the process of creating this collection of cabs. Were you going for a kind of specific vision in terms of sound, or was the goal breadth of sound? What cabs did you end up capturing, and what microphones did you use?
Right, so this idea behind capturing all of these cabs goes way back. I wanted to do this since more than 10 years at this point. And I'm not joking, I bought my first cab, an oversized cab, in 2014, 2013, and I didn't want to play on it. I didn't want to record through it. I just wanted to capture the best possible IRs. It was the time when everyone was using XFX Ultra, XFX2, and I saw the guys from Periphery, you included, in the documentary using XFX2. So I bought it, and the first thing that I noticed was that the most important part of the tone is the cab, especially in the mix. Because yes, distortion in between different amplifiers definitely has a different feeling, but what really makes or breaks the tone in the mix, how it's gonna cut through all the wall of other instruments, is the cab. So I was like, okay, let's spend some time auditioning all of the cabs, all the cab IRs in the XFX2. And I realized that there were too many cabs, and I was frying my ears doing so. I was going back and forth in between a million different IRs. And at that point, I was like, I'll just do it myself. Shortly after, I went to NAMM. I bought 3 Shure SM57s from my dear student Alex. And little did I know that those 57s were actually pretty amazing, so I'm using them to this day. And I started doing my first, experimentations with IRs. I started fiddling around to the point that I was like, okay, I think I get what really makes the difference. I tried it and it worked, and I got much, much closer results to the actual sound of the amplifier plugged into the cab. And from there, I didn't actually spend too much time on it because my priority was guitar lessons, my bands. So in between my old project Abiogenesis or then joining Within Destruction, touring the world with Within Destruction, I kind of left this like in the back burner for a while. In the meantime, I kept collecting cabs. Like for years, I kept collecting cabs without playing them at all. And I amassed quite a number of cabs with the thought in my mind that one day I would have properly captured all of them. Fast forward to 2022, I was ready for it. I hit you up again and you were like, okay, send me some of your samples. And from there, from like spring, April, May 2022, which is like 2 years ago, I started obsessively capturing tons and like thousands of IRs of all the cabs that I had at my studio and other studios as well. So this product hasn't been captured only at my place. There are a couple cabs like the 3VH cab and the Uber cab that have been captured at other studios, but they're all very consistently cohesive and good sounding in between each other because the technique that I've applied to capture all of them is always the same.
So, just to put a couple of pins in some of the things you said, I think one of the points you made early on was really important, which is how crucial the cabinet is in how a tone actually presents itself. How different amps do sound different, and obviously the EQ on the amps do sound different, but once you put it through this kind of crazy resonant filter that's a guitar cab, It has this really predefined EQ curve and set of resonances that are going to be the same pretty much no matter what amp you're using. And that's really what defines how a guitar sound is going to sit, especially in a mix. And I think, it's interesting, you refer to those times when people started getting things like the Axe effects. I think really that was the point where people started to cotton on to how big a difference a cab makes, because most people in the kind of real amp world might have lots of amps and just a couple of cabs. Cabs are way bigger. It's a pain switching in different speaker cabs all the time, whereas people would get quite kind of attracted to the expensive and fancy bit with all the knobs on it, the amps. And I think modelers really gave people a new perspective onto what I guess plenty of producers knew already at that point, that the cab was really the defining aspect. With that kind of basics about our connection and your process of capturing, I think let's get into, so what did you end up with? How many cabs are there and how many mics are there? And maybe we can even get to talking about, the different sounds within each of the cabs and mics on offer.
Well, I will actually just share my screen so we can actually show everyone the plugin itself with all the cabs and the microphones included. So this is the interface of the Contenders Round 1, and it features 8 cabs. The first one in the list here is the Mark TV, based on a 9060 TV model that I bought some years ago. And the speakers, I think, are from 2003. Those are Greenback speakers. Then we have a MES-TRAD based on a traditional cab. And this is from 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Those are V30s, 8-ohm V30s, compared to this one, which is 16-ohm Greenbacks. Then we have the 3VH cab, which doesn't have Greenbacks, doesn't have V30s. Those are EVH speakers, or rebranded heritage speakers. Those are a little bit more scooped than other more classic choices, but definitely very interesting, especially for metal. Then we have the Uber cab. This has been captured at another studio and features V30s. Actually, the model itself of this cab features V30s and T75s in an X pattern. The unique thing about this one is that the owner of this cab actually placed the V30s on top. He didn't like the X pattern too much, so he put all the V30s on top and the T75s at the bottom. I did capture the top left speaker, which is a V30 in this particular cab. Then we have the Fried cab, which even in this case has a combination of speakers. It has Greenbacks on top and V30s at the bottom. My personal taste, I prefer the Greenbacks on top. So what you're hearing in this product is the top left speaker, which is a 16-ohm Greenback. And then we have a 9060 AV cab, which is perhaps the most balanced sound that you can find in this product. And then we have actually one of my favorite cabs in here, which is an Orange cab from 2006. Those are 16-ohm V30s. And last but not least, we have the most humongous giant cab that I've ever owned and captured and seen in my life, which is the ENG-XXL model, which also features 8-ohm V30s like the MES-TRAD. But they actually sound very different from each other. So yeah, those are the 8 cabs featured in the Contenders Round 1.
As I mentioned before, the concept with the name Contenders is that all of these, like if you imagine you had a recording studio and you had all 8 cabs, it's pretty much every session, if there was going to be like heavy guitar tones recorded, all of them would be viable options. They'd all be contenders for like which one are you going to choose. Before we go any further on the kind of cabs talks, maybe we should just do like a really quick rundown of the mics that you use to capture.
So the first one is, of course, the staple, the SM57, and it's exactly this same microphone that I'm holding in my hand right now. And cool story about this microphone is that back in 2017, I was capturing all the amps for what was all the gains camper pack for GGD. And the studio that I captured the amps at had 20 different SM57s. Guess what? I compared all of them and my 57 won. So this is my golden 57. I'm never going to get rid of it. And that's why it's the first microphone on the list. You cannot go wrong with it.
All right. So what's the next one on the list?
All right. So we have a microphone that has been requested quite sometimes by GGD users in the past, which is the SN7B, which I'm using right now to talk through. If I can describe it, imagine like a bigger cousin of the 57. It's maybe not as sparkly in the high end. It's a little bit darker. Definitely a bigger bloated low end, but they're actually not that different in between each other. I would say those two can definitely be the two main choices that I would go as far as the first mic. So whenever I choose a cab, what I'm going to do is the 57 going to sound better or the 7B? I'm going to go back and forth in between those. And that's probably going to be, most of the time, the main microphone I'm going to choose for that particular cab. So after the 7B, we have the MD421, another staple, which I have here as well. One thing about this microphone, this is not the modern MD421-2. This is a little bit older, and this is the U4 model, which doesn't have the very pronounced spike at like 6, 7, 8K of the modern ones. I find it much more balanced, and I really like how it blends alongside, again, the 57. And then we have the M160, which is one of my favorite guitar microphones ever. And when I think about this microphone, it's just all about the mid-range. This microphone has such an effortless musical mid-range that pokes through anything. When you want a fuller sound that is not as spiky or fizzy as a 57, you get this microphone. After that, we have kind of an unusual choice, which is the KM140. It's a very old microphone. One thing that I really like about this microphone is that the highs are never harsh. It has those very, very musical highs that will permit you to cut through doing even the highest note without ever being harsh. So that's why I like this microphone so much. After the KM140, we have the C414, and this specific microphone is based on the BULS model, which is more the traditional version of the C414. And essentially what you can expect from this microphone is a very transparent representation of the cab. So with microphones such as the SM57, you get a very mid-range focused tone. But at the same time, with the C414, you have a little bit less of a mid-range. It's not necessarily scooped. It's just a very neutral mid-range. But at the same time, you definitely get more pronounced lows and more pronounced highs that definitely complements very well with other microphones, which could be more focused on the mid-range. Last but not least, we have the ART121, which is a staple for guitar microphones. Well, this is the most huge sounding microphone of all of them. I would say you can take the characteristics of the C414, make them a little bit more extreme, and then you have the ART121. You're going to have very subby lows, definitely a scooped mid-range, and definitely more fizzy highs. And this pretty much is the opposite of something like a 57. So this is why this combination in between the Royer ART121 and the 57 is such a popular one.
All right, so we've done loads of talking at this point. I think it's time for you to show us some of the tones and kind of do like a little kind of curated walkthrough, I guess, of the various tones on offer.
All right, I'm going to start with something that is very familiar to people. I'm in drop C tuning. I'm using Fishman Fluence modern pickups, very popular. I'm using the Nolly plugin from Neural DSP, cannot go wrong with that. That all goes into the Contenders Round 1. And this first sound is what I would say is an amazing starting point. So we have the AV cab V30s with the TV cab Greenbacks. And the combination of those just with a 57 is just like amazing. And it sounds like this.
It does indeed, yeah. Can you kind of talk us through what those two cabs are kind of bringing to the table? You know, you've got two going on. It'd be nice to kind of unpack what they're doing.
Actually, I'm gonna play through each one of them separately so that people can get more of the difference in between each other and how do they sound when coupled together. Mar AV, as I've mentioned, is very, very balanced, has a nice sparkle, maybe lacks a little bit of low end, but in the mix, it's just a very safe choice. On the other hand, The TV model is a bit more oversized, so it sounds more chuggy by itself. And then, of course, once we bring them together, the sound is just complete.
You know, just having those two cabs at your disposal, you could cover a huge amount of tones for most styles of music, really, between that.
All right, so we have heard the AV, and of course, we have heard the TV. Now I would like to go a little bit more in detail about this very, very useful and powerful knob, which is the dark and bright knob. Now, the default position is what I decided being the sweet spot for each microphone. So when you load up a microphone, which could be the 57, the M160, and so on, the default positioning is going to be what, to my ears, I decided a very good balanced representation of that microphone. But my ears and my taste might definitely differ from yours. So that's why I actually provided different values and different positionings as well, so that the user can blend in between the center position, the sweet spot, to maybe a darker position if he finds that that particular sweet spot is a bit too bright for him, or vice versa. If he finds that it's too dark for him, he can definitely brighten it up. There's one more thing that I would like to mention, is that we are not offering the entirety of the speaker. This is, by design, a much more narrow spectrum of the speaker. So the dark position and the bright position that you can blend in are not going to be too bright or too dark. They're not going to be at the extremes of the speaker. We're still talking about very, very usable positions that the user can just have fun and finding exactly the sweet spot for their needs. That being said, here it is at the default sweet spot. I'm going to put it all the way dark. Of course, all the sparkle and the fizz is gone. Not too much of it. It's still very musical. And if we want a little bit more of that sparkle,
as you say, it's totally usable even at extreme settings. You know, it's something I always say with these videos. It's like, don't be afraid of putting the knob all the way in one direction or the other. Why don't you show us some of the different microphones?
So here we have the 57 on the MAR AV by default, which sounds like this. And if I switch to the SM7B, you can expect a little bit of a more bloated, bigger sound, but that still cuts through very nicely.
Yeah, I really hear the difference in the way the top end is shaped. The 57, yeah, feels a little bit more open, but a little bit more fizzy. The SM7B can sound really nice, almost like a slightly off-axis sound of a regular 57 in the top end.
All right, I will continue with the microphone comparison. This time we have the MD421. You can expect a little bit more of a scooped sound, not as fizzy as the SM57, but a bit more present.
Yeah, I think it's such a valid sound, like the classic 421, as opposed to the new one, which you pretty much need to blend. The 421, or the older 421, you can just turn the fader up and it sounds great.
I will continue with the M160, and you will hear how rounder it sounds compared to a 57. I will actually do a back and forth in between them. And then M160.
Yeah, you really hear like the proximity effect on the ribbon, don't you? I mean, it's not a standard ribbon mic, but it does just have that kind of like you've boosted up a lot of the kind of very low frequencies. Again, not as much as the Royer or something like that, but it's a really cool sounding mic.
All right, so I'm going to switch to the KM140. I would say the KM140 is less chuggy than other microphones. The low end is less prominent and focused in a specific area. It's more like just very broad. And at the same time, the highs are very rounded off. So we can expect a bit more of a musical, warmer sound from it.
I always think there's such a rich sound, like the way the mids are expressed is, and the kind of lack of a presence peak that you get with the condenser just makes it very balanced.
Let's go to the last couple microphones. We have the C414 and the R121. Those by themselves, I would say, are not as fun to play through as others, but as far as blending them alongside main microphones, such as 57, they work beautifully. But anyways, I'll actually give you a comparison in between 57 and the more lower focused C414 and R121. But now with this, which will be exaggerated even more by the R21, in which will be even more bassy, even more scooped.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, as a preference, I tend to always lead towards like a 57 plus something else. But more recently, I'm finding I am enjoying these kind of darker microphones or more low-endy microphones, and perhaps visiting the amp settings and kind of changing those a little bit, like turning down the bass on the amp, turning down the resonance on the amp, and then you can actually get that size from the microphone pickup. All right, so we've checked out all the different microphones. I think we should just do like a quick once through each cab. Stick to the SM57. It's a sound everyone knows, even though, as we've discussed, maybe it's not the optimal choice with every cab. It's at least like a very familiar sound. So I'd say just go top to bottom. Let's hear each cab with the same riff, and maybe just a few little comments on each of them as we go.
Right, so I will play exactly the same riff as mentioned, and I will start with the Mar TV, and then we will go through all of them. Let's move on to the MES-TRAD based on a traditional cab with 8 ohm V30s. What you can expect from this one is definitely a rounder, very, very mid-centric sound.
You know, this is kind of my ideal sort of cab, and especially like those kind of early 2000s vintage 30s, the 8 ohm ones are like my go-to. I will say, you know, I just find them so musical to play through. Often in the mix, you need to brighten them up a little bit, and you can hear how this one is kind of really not got any fizz on top, which is a beautiful thing, but in some situations, it's maybe lacking a little bit of liveliness. Or so whether that's a mic position thing or a blend of another cab. And you know, just to say, this is why I love these plugins so much, because they really make it so easy to mess with tones, to blend, to try things you wouldn't normally try. If you're in a studio with real cabs, it's so much faff, like to try beyond 2 or 3 cabs and like be able to flip between them as well, you know, have enough microphones and inputs and everything to be able to really make judgments and blends. That this is just like, it makes creativity so easy.
I mean, it's really like having a full studio of 8 cabs at your disposal. The benefit is that it's all here. You don't have to mess with microphones. You don't have to mess with like plug-in, unplug-in. You don't have to mess with huge amount of volume from each cab. It's everything here. And I can assure you guys, these sound audibly identical to just plugging straight into the real cab. And Nolly can attest to it. So everything is ready to go right in the plugin. And I will now switch to the 3VH cab, which compared to the traditional definitely has more sizzle and definitely is a bit more scooped at the same time. There's one more thing that I would like to mention about this cab. So these speakers in this cab, they're not very common. They're not greenbacks, they're not V30s. How they sound is that they're generally kind of scooped with a very prominent low end. I'm not a huge fan of too scooped tones. Therefore, for this particular cab, what I did, I actually captured one of the bottom speakers. And I'm gonna get a little bit nerdy with you guys right now. So me and Nolly, we know this because we have captured countless cabs. There's always a difference in between upper speakers and bottom speakers. Usually, bottom speakers will always have more of a spike in the mid-range, in the 1K area. So because of this, and because the speakers themselves are quite scooped, I actually chose to use one of the bottom speakers, which added this spike in the mid-range to kind of rebalance things out.
You know, arguably these differences are small, but to someone like you say that like ourselves that have captured so many cabs and that really care about getting the best possible guitar tones for recordings, they do add up and they do make distinct differences, and it's very satisfying when you can predict how something's going to turn out and it turns out to be true as well.
Right, so let's move on to the Uber cab, and this has more of a classic old school voicing. I don't think I would have this cab suited for more modern stuff, but my ears might work differently than yours. So I invite you guys to try this for yourself, and maybe this will end up being your favorite cab for modern stuff.
Nice. So when you say old school, what do you think? Like what do you think frequency wise or tonally? What do you mean by that?
It doesn't have a very pronounced mid-range. It is definitely more bassy, but not super focused at the same time. The sound that comes in my mind when I think about this cab is Rammstein. When I hear Rammstein in my head, this is the sound that I think they would go for. Bit more scooped, not overly scooped, nice sizzle to it, big sounding, classic, not overly modern, not overly genty, of course. So this is, to my taste, what I hear about this cab. Let's move on to the tightest cab of all this product. This cab can definitely work very well with very low tunings. I will make you hear this afterwards with a properly tuned guitar, but so far, let's go with this riff.
I think it also is quite suitable for the kind of more classic, like you think of like a Guns N' Roses tone or something like that. It does have that just kind of more hyped up top end. That's like kind of energetic, fizzy top end to it.
Let's go to the Mar AV, which I've already played before, but let's compare with everything else. So as we have noticed before, very, very classic sound, extremely balanced, not as present as the Fried cab and not as chuggy maybe as the Fried cab, but this cab is all about the mids and really very musical mids that actually complement very well this cab. This cab is also about the mids, but completely different compared to the Mar AV, because this cab is more about the lower mids. It's very, very guttural and dark sounding. Let's hear.
I've got a love-hate thing with this kind of cab, and it's more hate than love. In terms of like all the times I've mic'd one up, there's only been a handful of times where I've been really into the tone, and I have to say this is definitely one of those really good tones from those cabs.
This cab has such a different construction than all of the others. Maybe the extra baffling or extra like grill, because the grill is really, really thick on this cab, makes the highs very rounded.
Grill makes such a difference. It's so thick. It's one of those, people talk about the blankets felt like they were taken off my ears or something, That's really like there's a thick fabric in front of the speakers between the speaker and the mic. So it has a very distinct roll off to the top end.
I think we can move on to the last cab. This cab is absolutely gigantic. Like if you see this in person, is absolutely enormous. And just like its size, it sounds huge. Almost sounds like a bass cab because you have this very bloated and broad lower mids and lows, but at the same time, the mid-range is not really very present. So here it is.
No, it's a really cool addition to the pack. I think, we've gone through all 8 of them at this point, and they're just so different sounding, all of them. One feature we should talk about, which is present in all of our Studio Cabs software, is the Master EQ switch, which, when you engage it, actually switches to pre-EQ'd versions of all of the IRs. In the past, that's been stuff that I've done, and it's typically been quite subtle, just notching out offensive frequencies and resonances to make the cabs just sound a little bit more mix ready. In this case, Francesco undertook doing all of that EQing, and I think he did a fantastic job. And I think it's really worth demonstrating because I feel like the differences are maybe a bit more pronounced with the Master EQ on this plugin versus previous ones.
This Master EQ, as you said, it's such a powerful switch. So when I'm playing through this cab, which is the fried cab with a 57, it's the raw IR that I captured. When I engage the Master EQ, it's not the same curve, same polishing curve that we apply to all of the cabs and all of the microphones. I literally EQ'd every single IR, every single microphone and cab independently to remove some offensive frequencies, some harsh overtones. I apply just a little bit of filtering in the lows and the highs to make them more mix ready. So when you engage the Master EQ, it's essentially loading a new set of IRs that are just mix ready. So if you want to get more of the raw sound of each IR, definitely go for Master EQ off. But when it comes to the mix and you want something that is really immediately removing all of those nasty higher frequencies that are inevitably part of a raw guitar tone, you flip the EQ switch on and it goes like... I'll go back and forth so you can listen, guys. On. So definitely more polished sounding.
I know you've chosen that cab for a reason because that really knocks out a lot of the offensive kind of top end frequencies in the Friedman and just makes it sound a lot richer.
Yeah, so for example, a cab like the Mar AV is extremely balanced already to begin with. So if I were to play back and forth, you wouldn't hear too many differences because I didn't have to do that much. But stuff like this one, or the 3VH, which has like that spiky mid-range being a bottom speaker, as I've mentioned, you can definitely hear more of the difference.
Do you want to show that difference?
Yeah, sure. So you will definitely hear more of a spiked mid-range, center mid-range when the cab is in its raw state. And now I tamed the mid-range, center mid-range a little. So as you noticed, before the mid-range was really poking through everything. Now that the mid-range has been rebalanced a little, everything sounds a bit more hi-fi because of it.
So yeah, and just to be clear also, the Master EQ is going to be active if you export the IR. So when you export your selection, if you have the Master EQ on, that's going to be baked into the exported IR.
Yeah, that actually brings us to this extra feature within the GGD plugin, which is the same as we have included in all the previous products, which is the export feature. Now, of course, this is a plugin, and we made a plugin because we don't like to mess around with a million folders and a million files. But if the user wants to use these cabs with his gear, like fractal stuff, neural stuff, or other plugins, other amp sims, he can definitely export each blend that he has created into a WAV file. And then, of course, that WAV file will be imported into whatever he wants. And the WAV file will be exported at the same sample rate that the user is using in his DAW.
Also, just to mention, within the plugin, you've got pan controls. If you've got a mono instance of the plugin, you're going to export a mono IR and it's not going to have the pan stuff active in it. However, if you put this on a stereo channel and pan the things around, your exported IR will include the pan information of the various moves that you've done.
Okay, so for example, I might not use this every day, but let's say that I want a slightly different sound from my left speaker to my right speaker. In this case, I will probably choose the same cab, but I will go for a slightly different microphone. In this case, I can pan them differently and have a slightly wider sound compared to just using, for example, originally a single 57. I'll switch back again to a single 57.
And it's worth saying, the more different the two sounds are, the more wide it will sound. So if you use the 3VH with something like the MES-TRAD or the ORNGE or something like that, you'd notice it kind of even wider again. All right, so to kind of round things out, let's take a look at some of the presets. We'll specifically look at the ones that you've created, but it's worth saying there are a huge number of artist presets included with this, which is something that Francesco has kind of headed up. He's managed to get a lot of people to do them, and that means that there are just a massive amount of starting points for people to try and kind of keep exploring and see what their favorite guitarists use. So fair play for doing that. And yeah, let's go through your presets and maybe you can kind of just give a little bit of an explanation of what they're for and what amp setup you're using for them, and then a little demo.
I'm going for the Chugmaster 9000 as the first preset. This is a combination of two cabs, the Fried cab and the Orange cab, and the result is this very massively chugging monster. That's why I called it like this. And in this case, I changed guitar. This is a baritone guitar with a 28-inch scale. It has the Marzio deactivators, and it sounds like this. Massive. All right, so
Huge.
Talking about huge, we have Huge Jackman. In this case, we have this very rounded and creamy traditional cab, which at the same time makes the tone very dark and makes the chugs very bloomy. So I'm gonna play some chugs through this. Right, so let's move on to more presets. Let's move on to Ryan's Fav. This was the very first preset I made for this plugin. It was actually the easiest preset to make because I didn't make this preset. This preset was made by my excellent friend Ryan Sue from Polaris, which unfortunately passed away last year. And he was one of the very first people I sent these IRs to. And no matter which combinations of microphones and cabs I was sending him, he was always back and forth to just tried and true combination of the MAR AV and MAR TV, both equally at the same volume with a 57. So this is my little tribute to Ryan. All right, so let's move on to a very genty preset, which is the Tholuminati preset, which, as the name implies, it's made for very, very low tunings. I'm using this Ibanez with Fishman pickups, and it's tuned to drop P, so let's hear how it sounds. let's switch the tuning a little bit higher. We're gonna go to Yin Yang, which is a favorite combination of mine, from a completely white cab and a completely black cab. That's why the name Yin Yang. I'm using this Ibanez in drop D tuning with a Miracle Man in the bridge. We will move on to lead presets. This is Shreddy Mercury, which, as cheesy as it may sound, I definitely chose this name for a reason, because this preset sings. In this case, I'm using this Ibanez headless guitar with stock pickups. I'm playing through the Petrucci plugin, and then let's hear how it sounds. From the Shreddy Mercury preset, we're going to switch to Papatruch, which, as the name clearly implies, it is based on what in my head I hear as the ultimate Petrucci sound. Now, this cab, the traditional cab, has been used by John on countless occasions. I'm choosing to represent this cab with the KM140 and the C414, which are definitely going to extend the lows and highs in a more musical way. Last but not least, we have the Clean Supreme preset, and I think this is where really the Uber cab shines. I think it's a really full sounding, but also adds some nice sparkle in the highs for the most pristine cleans.
All right, thanks so much for taking us through all of those presets that you've created. There's some really fantastic sounds in there. And speaking of presets, I mean, there is just such a stacked list of presets. This is more than we've ever included in any GGD product to date. Are there any particular presets you'd like to kind of highlight within there?
Well, each of these guys, I think, really brought it. For example, a good starting point for something that is less metal-oriented would be Jack Gardner, which provided funky tones, more like lower gain stuff. So for the classic type of stuff, you can definitely go through those. But there's also really creative stuff that some of the guys have provided. We have David Maxim Mitic, which has really interesting presets in here. For example, Fake Distance. The fact that this R121 is polarity inverse compared to the others, and given the fact that it has such like a big low end, it makes it sound like the microphone is so much more far. Another guy that provided something kind of similar, but perhaps even more extreme, is Spiro Dusias. And this preset is called Ring Mod Hypothesis. And just playing through it, it just sounds so weird. There's this one that I like a lot from Buster. He basically loves M160, as the preset implies. There's also the bass cab per mic. So this preset is essentially his choice of, for each microphone, because we have 7 microphones and we have 7 slots, he chose what, to his opinion, the bass cab to represent each microphone was. So I think that's a very neat idea. And by the way, if you want to really compare something very quickly, you don't need to actually select another cab and then select another microphone. What you could actually more easily do is something that we introduced just in this product. So if you select solo, of course, it's going to solo just this track. But if you select solo on another one, these are going to be soloed together. But by clicking Option or the Alt button, now you can actually exclusive solo in between different tracks. So let's say that you can preload each slot with whatever option you want, perhaps different cabs, different microphones. You can actually solo each one of them independently to audition them very, very quickly in the mix.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, some amazing presets in there, and it's going to be really fun for all of us, even the people involved in the creation of the product, to go and see what other people have thought to do with the sounds, because there is just such a range in there. All right. So with that, I think, Francesco, we have done a very thorough run through of what this plugin can do. So yeah, unless there's any last points you'd like to add, I guess I'd just say thanks very much for your time, Francesco, both in the creation and the explanation of it. And we really hope that it inspires all sorts of creativity in those who end up getting hold of Contenders Round 1.
Thank you so much for hosting this, for having me part of this. I want to say, guys, I put my soul into this product. 2 years of extremely hard work went into this, both from my capturing side of things and both the GGD team into making this happen with the software. So I really hope you will enjoy this product just as much as me and Nolly hated at the end doing this, because we went through so many revisions, but we're really proud of this, of course. And yeah, that's it for now.